every year since about 2015, I've tried to read 52 books a year. And so basically that evens out to about, or averages out to about one book a week. And so over the years, I've not done a great job of documenting all the books. Like I've used different apps and just kind of didn't have a good system year over year to do this. But I finally, gotten into a kind of a better system a few years ago. And so one thing I do is I try to keep track of what week it is. And then, write down, like in my journal, I write down when I have completed a book. And so then that way I know, like, okay, this is the 34th week, so I need to have 34 books read by now. And by about mid-year this year, I was just woefully behind. Just like, I don't know, normally I'm ahead or slightly, like maybe a book or so behind, but I was like 10 books behind at one point this year. So this was a month of trying to get caught up. And I did read 7 books in August. So I actually did, catch up a bit. I thought, I need some books that I can just kind of like really enjoy. I don't need it to be, I love really long books when I have the time, but I didn't want anything too difficult. I just wanted some light reading, and I chose to reread the Little House series. And so I first read, of course, the first book in the series, which is Little House in the Big Woods. And so you can see this is a well-loved copy because it doesn't have the cover. It would have had the illustrations by Garth Williams if it did have the cover, but the illustrations, there are some inside, which I love. And this was one of my favorite books when I was a kid. I read it, I don't know how many times. I love these books. I just love them. I loved the TV show also when I was a kid, but I loved the books more. And as I was reading it, I realized I am half pint. Or at least I identify with her. I am very much like a young Laura was. Like there are so many things about her that when I was reading it, I was like, no wonder I love these books, because it's like, I do the same things that Laura did. I grew up on a farm. I always wanted to help my dad. I loved getting my hands dirty. I was a tomboy. I never really liked the frilly stuff. I was just, more an outdoorsy type. I liked getting my hands dirty. And she had kind of a temper too. And I love how she talks about a lot of times she kept it inside, which is what I would do as a kid, I think. But yeah, there's just so many things that I just so much enjoyed this book. And of all the books in the series, this is certainly my favorite. I feel like things were just better back in the big woods. And I often, as I continued reading the series, I thought, why did they ever leave? Because it was so much better back there. The next book I read was Tiny Habits by B.J. Fogg. And so I actually checked that book out from the library. And I thought overall it was a good book. It was not my favorite habit book ever. I had read previously Atomic Habits and I liked it better. Now, it might have been because Atomic Habits was very similar in just its conclusions. And so maybe if I had read it in reverse order, maybe I would have found it more helpful. But another thing was there was a lot of what I felt like was kind of like marketing in the book. The guy has a coaching program. And so there was just kind of that aspect to it. But that being said, the actual meat of the book, as far as like how to get into a habit, why it's hard to get into habits, that was some really good information. And so yeah, it was overall good book, but just not my favorite. The next book I read was Little House on the Prairie. So this one, they leave the big woods and they go to Indian country, and so this was like a really good book, but I remembered as I was reading it, like, yeah, I didn't read this one nearly as much as I read Little House in the Big Woods. I think because I, again, thought, they should have just stayed where they were. And there were a lot of, kind of frightening things that happened to them. Like Indians would come into their house and with not being asked, they would come in and just kind of like, act like it was their house. And so there was a lot that happened in this book. That it was not as happy a time. They get malaria at one point. It's a lot that they go through. In fact, it's kind of like tragedy after tragedy. And so I do understand my younger self, like, yeah, that's why that one didn't get reread very much. The next book I read was a book called Your Voice in Demand, and it was a book put out by Author House, which is a self-publishing house kind of thing. I don't even actually know if it's still around, but someone gave it to me just to borrow it, to read it. They knew that I was an author and they thought it might be helpful. And I thought the information was good. There was some that was a bit outdated. I mean, it talked about fax machines and stuff. And so some of the stuff, it was like, yeah, that's kind of, more like email and things like that. Although there were a lot of things that were still useful. It was, like the idea of like contacting different media outlets and things like that, and telling them about your book and things like that. But overall, the information was good. It was just, here's the thing. It's really hard for me as an author to do marketing. I don't know. This is apparently not something that comes naturally to most writers. A lot of writers that they just want to write, and that's me. I just want to write. I don't really want to market. I actually get really embarrassed and shy feeling if asked to talk about my writing, or if somebody asks me about a book I've written or something. It's I don't know. I have a hard time with it, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts. One being the Six Figure Author podcast, and it seems to be that a lot of authors struggle with that. They like to write, but the marketing piece is kind of difficult. So because it's difficult for me, I do know that I should read more about it, learn more about it, and try to implement it. So the information was good. The real thing to see is, will I actually do the things that it says to do in the book? So then I went back to more fiction, and this was On the Banks of Plum Creek, which was the next book in the series. I mean, actually, technically, the next book in the series is Farmer Boy, which is focused on the life of Almanzo Wilder, who Laura Ingalls Wilder ended up marrying. But I wanted to read all the books about the Ingalls family and then go back and read Farmer Boy. And actually, I'm reading Farmer Boy right now as I'm recording this video. Well, not as I'm recording this video, but you know what I mean. So this book was great and heartbreaking at the same time. They actually start out living in a dugout, and which I always thought that was neat, when I was a kid. But then Pa builds them a house, and the house even has glass windows, which it just seems like, oh, things are gonna go so well for them now. Like they're out where they're gonna be, and things will just be wonderful. But it was hard times back then, and they had to experience more struggle in their life. A little spoiler alert here. There's locusts, there are prairie fires, there's a blizzard. I mean, it's like, why do things have to be so hard for this family? The next book was By the Shores of Silver Lake. So I thought, okay, this is going to be like happiness again, right? Like they've gone through so much, things have to look up. But this book starts off so sad. Like it's talking about how they've had scarlet fever. They're just kind of all feeling blah. Mary is blind. I mean, it's just like, it starts off so terribly that you think things must get better. Like things are going to be happy. They're going to go to this Silver Lake place and things are going to be wonderful. And I guess I had just blocked all of this out of my little kid memory because I kept thinking things, they start looking up for them. But no, there's this whole scene where Pa has been having to do the paychecks for these people in town. Like he's like a clerk now. He's not a farmer anymore, or at least he's kind of like farmer plus he's the pay man for the workers, and they get really upset with him, and they're kind of gonna want to do him harm. So basically the whole town leaves. Like all the people leave because they're done with the job. They were like grading things for the railroad, and so they're moving on. And the Ingalls family actually gets to stay in the surveyor's house, just to kind of make sure it doesn't get destroyed or anything. And they actually have a good winter. It's just nice. They have there was even a chapter I think called something like "The Happy Winter Days," which was nice. It was a nice little break from all the tragedy. But then after that, there like as the spring starts to come on, there's all this drama because Pa needs to try to get the homestead claimed, this little place that he had found. But at the same time, all these people are just rushing into this same place to try to claim the land, and the thing turns violent at one point. And so it was, and this was her actual life that she's talking about. And that was one thing about these books. As I was reading it this go around, I was reading it as an adult, which was very different than reading it as a child, because I saw just how tumultuous her life was. They were constantly on the move, trying to find, just privacy, basically. I mean, that was why they left the big woods. Pa said, "Oh, there are too many men here. We got to move on." And so they're constantly pushing west, trying to just, feel, like they had some room to breathe. And so, which is something I've always thought too. I'm always wanting, that room to breathe. So I can definitely relate to that. The last book I finished was The Long Winter. So, I felt like I got a little bit of a reprieve with the one about Silver Lake, but this one, it was rough. It was really it was very difficult. And I was trying to remember as I was reading it, if I ever actually finished it as a kid. And I think maybe I didn't, because it was so sad, and maybe not necessarily sad, but just hard to read, because it was just a long winter. There's adventure in it. At one point, the family is basically starving, and Almanzo, the Wilder boys, or actually just Almanzo and a friend of his, they go out to try to get some grain that they had heard a rumor might have been grown somewhere on a homestead nearby. And so there is adventure, and it is a great book, but it was just sad. This life that she lived, there was just so much tragedy, just like constant hard life. And the thing is, though, this book does give you a real appreciation for what people went through. They went through some really hard times, like the cold weather. I mean, like 40 below zero. I can't even fathom that. And they're trying to deal with this weather in this house that it's actually a store building in town where, they can see the frost on the nails through the roof. I mean, it's just, they had it rough. And it was a difficult book to get through just because of knowing that this was something that she did go through. This was really her family. They almost starved to death. I mean, it was just rough. But still, a very good book. I think it's definitely one everyone should read, because you do get an appreciation for how tough things were and how tough humans are too. So August was a great month. September, I'm already about a week into it, and I'm finishing up the Little House series, and so I'll talk about that next month.
Allie McGee comes home from school one day to find that her little brother Pete is gone. She remembers the imaginative stories he told about a magical tree in the forsaken forest, and she immediately sets out into the woods behind her house to find him. She begins to realize his stories were true when she finds the enchanted tree and is transported to a different world, only to discover that Pete's been kidnapped by the wicked King Olshek. She must go on a dangerous journey to the land of Hinnom to get to the castle where her brother is being held captive. Will Allie be able to save her brother? Or will she too be taken prisoner in Olshek's castle?